Welcome to Design Downtime, the podcast where we celebrate the joys of living a balanced creative life. I'm your host, Guy Siegel, a design director in Toronto, Canada, and I invite you to join me on this journey as we redefine what it means to be a successful design professional. Let's break free from the shackles of hustle culture and embrace the full spectrum of human experience, because life is too precious to be spent only in pursuit of productivity. Today, I'm excited to talk to Dominika Noworolska. Dominika is a Polish-turned-Scottish monotropic researcher and facilitator driven by her desire to support meaningful change by making sense of complexity in our social world and ourselves. She has worn many hats over the years: commercial semiotician, ethnographer, user researcher, and mediator. Through her company CoSense, she aspires to facilitate collective sense-making and better dialogue across differences, with warm tea in hand. Dominika, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's great to be here. I'm holding tea, of course.
Of course, which is what we're going to talk about today.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, it's great to be part of this.
Really appreciate it. And I usually like to start with the origin story. Where does tea come into the picture for you?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's something that I only made a link to some time ago, it's tea. I lost link with tea for a while and then rediscovered it again. So where it started for me was I grew up in Krakow, and we're very fortunate to have quite nice tea houses there, sort of similar tradition to Hungary, I think, and the tea houses that we've got are obviously not your sort of typical, now I live in Britain, it's slightly different with high tea and everything else, but that's very much sort of the mix of different Asian influences with your sort of a bit of Turkish as well, pillows on the floor and you can sit, take your shoes off. And there was one specifically that I and my sort of friends group at the time used to go to just as a way to socialize, rather than, obviously we were too young to go to the pub yet. That was sort of around 13, 14, something like that. And it used to be this kind of place. It wasn't very accessible, which is why sadly it doesn't exist anymore. So it's very much a memory because they moved to a more accessible place. But you would go down those quite steep stairs to like this sort of like a cave, like a basement in a Krakow tenement. And there would just be this small kind of window at the top, almost like one of those like street level windows, So like a tiny bit of light from there, but mostly it was dim. And there was loads of mood lighting sort of thing. So it was very atmospheric that you could really, you would lose track of time, literally, because you wouldn't know how long you've been there, right? And and there's different seating areas, so it was very kind of almost like a multimodal experience for me, if that makes sense. Like it wasn't just the tea, it was the whole wrap around it, that you had your kind of more seating area, but then also you had that kind of snook where you could take your shoes off, as I said, sit down like around this kind of low table, and you would order your tea at the counter, and then they would bring it to you in the beautiful sort of ceramic teapots, and then you could get refills as well, and you would just share. And then we used to have loads of conversations around tea, so I think it was my first sort of experience of that sort of dialogue that was flowing that way, and, us being Polish, we would get into quite, at times philosophical debates, especially when you're, a teenager. Sort of what you do. So it was now looking back, a very unusual experience, this sort of to have that kind of spot. And then tea was at that time more of a background to that, but I think it stayed as that kind of, association, as that sort of memory to, what the mood that it created. And that's something that then over time, when I rediscovered it later on, because, as you do when I moved to Britain, I would only drink, a cuppa, so just like, black tea bag with some milk, right? Which is very much not the same thing we'll talk about in a second. I mean, it serves a different purpose. It's not necessarily worse, for our British listeners. I'm not saying that that's a bad thing at all. But it's just a very, very different beast. And that was the beginning, I think.
Definitely don't want you to be cancelled tea-wise.
Let's not even get into, whether milk first or, or water first or any of the like.
We'll tread carefully there. You mentioned in the beginning that you sort of fell out of that tea culture until you rediscovered it for yourself. What happened there? Was it the move to the UK? Was it life?
No, to be honest with you, I mean, it was always there a tiny bit. So there was also a similar kind of ish tea house in Glasgow when I moved to Glasgow. Or maybe actually that's what it was, because in Manchester, so I moved to Manchester first for 6 years, and there weren't really places like that at all. So that's why I wasn't, going to them. If anything, I was going to shisha places more often to kind of get a similar sort of mood, I think, Also, dim sort of interiors, and you could sit, talk, and maybe get some, mint tea instead. But in Glasgow, there was this place called Chajowna, which was also quite similar, and that, they would do loads of sort of your Chinese and Japanese teas. So I would go there, but that was before I started learning more about tea and doing it in the house. So I think that started, I don't know, it was just something that popped into my head that actually, quite like to find out more, because I remember learning some trivia, that seemed interesting. Like, many people don't know, for example, that you get your different varieties of tea and they all come from the same bush. It's not like you've got like a green tea bush or a black tea bush. It's all this from the same leaf. You could make all the different kind of colors of tea in inverted, commas. But actually, it's just a processing. And I just found it interesting, that kind of thing of actually, how much there is to learn there. And at some point, I also started drinking less alcohol, not for any particular reason. I think I just got fed up of 2-day hangovers once I started getting them. It was mostly just that thing of like, oh, actually, I realized that I just don't love the experience after. And I would get sort of bad second mental health day, and it just felt very kind of turbulent. So instead, I mean, I still drink a bit, but on the whole, it was just that thing that like, oh, if I'm not going to be spending loads of money on alcohol, I might as well start spending it on tea. Sort of replacing one for the other. And then it's still an interesting sort of association, because again, how people talk about wine and the kind of, the terroir there and everything else, it's actually quite similar in tea, as we also have tasting sessions and everything else. So, and in a position to how I would feel, with alcohol, actually, I discovered after a while that tea really, once you get into sort of your property, your kind of leafy tea, it's got a lot of like very soothing, very calming, very sometimes even energizing properties. That's very different to coffee as well. So it was that kind of, I almost started then experimenting with, how do different teas make me feel, and if I want to get into this mood, is it this one or which ones maybe I would avoid. So black teas, for example, usually I would avoid leafy black teas because they do tend to be more caffeinated, and you brew it for longer, so it also extracts more of the caffeine. So then I would get jittery. Oh, so I suppose another reason was that I quit coffee as well, because coffee would make me very anxious. As I discovered, I think sometimes people don't realize, because it sometimes happens when you're coming down from it. So hours later, you would start feeling anxious. And I made that lane. It was the thing of like, right, okay, what else am I going to do, right? If I'm not going to do coffee or alcohol.
Before we continue with tea as it is now for you, I want to go back a bit to Krakow. You talked about something really interesting that I don't know how many people, at least in North America, think of, because you were talking about experiencing tea in tea houses, right? You're going out of the house. It's a place you go to, you sit there, you have tea, you talk. It's kind of like the coffee shop culture of Europe, I would say. Did you drink tea at home, or was drinking tea as an occasion to go out?
So I would drink tea at home, but only bag tea. At that time, it was very much kind of separation of, I would just have kind of your tea adjacent drink at home, and then go to that magical place, and all of a sudden there's like, 20 different, selections of your Japanese greens, your Chinese greens, 5 different types of these ones from this region, from the other region, and you would literally just explore those different, like how that changes, right? Like there is no one tea essentially that you would drink there. Although you would learn which ones you would gravitate towards, because again, at the time I wasn't yet as knowledgeable about tea, so it was just the case of kind of picking one that sounded nice, right? But again, like that was enough, right? It was that kind of almost initiation into that tea as an experience rather than just something that you just drink because it's hydrating or whatever.
Yeah, and this is definitely a topic that comes, both for coffee drinkers and for tea drinkers, is the ritual, the ceremony of making tea. After you moved to the UK, you moved to Manchester, and then you moved to Glasgow, and you, let's say, rediscovered tea drinking culture for yourself. How did that happen?
Well, I think actually it was even later than discovering that tea house, because the tea house was there. But ironically enough, I didn't go to it as often for whatever reason, just one of those things where it just wasn't part of my routine. I suppose it was a bit out of the way, so once in a while I would make the trek sort of thing, but it wasn't like a regular thing. Yeah, as I said, just one day I just thought, oh, actually, like, you remember when you were really enjoying tea, like, how about kind of trying to find out more about it? And I think there were 2 points, I think, where that started kind of turning into a bit of a fascination, right? The one, when I decide to look into something, I really look into it, classic researcher. So I started Googling, as you would, and I found this YouTube channel by the owner of a tea house in London, in Camden, actually. It's called Mayleaf, and he's actually a very prolific sort of YouTube content creator, and he often posts about the different ways of preparing tea, or the different kind of stock that they have, or the different sort of tasting sessions, because his as a kind of tea sommelier, his sense of smell and taste is very refined. So he would do like blind tasting, guessing, just like pouted tricks. Something I actually sadly can't do because my sense of smell is really not good enough. So I'm not actually that good, I'll never become like a blender or something like this, which is also a potential career path as it turns out, it's a whole world out there. So yeah, so I just started watching these videos and kind of getting more and more interested into, actually, I didn't even realize that there's so much into this, that you could do like a full kind of 10-part, tasting sessions with, smelling things before they hit the water, after they hit the water, and then how that shifts as well, and then also, the first tasting, the second tasting, the third tasting, and how the leaves also change throughout that, because obviously they have less and less saturation as you keep steeping them. I suppose the big difference, I haven't clarified that, is that the style of brewing that I got into is actually the Chinese one, that's called Gong Fu brewing, rather than what's called as the Western one, which is the Western one is you would just, you would use smaller amounts and then steep it for longer, but then you wouldn't be able to repeat it as many times. So with Chinese style of brewing, you would use much larger amounts, sort of 3 to 5 to sometimes 6 grams if someone likes stronger brews, and then keep going for like 5 to 7 to 8 times essentially. So your teapots might be smaller. You kind of use maybe like 200 milliliters, right, of water, but then you can feel how the tea is changing. So you really sort of engage all the senses in that sense, right? I suppose that's that ceremony that you're talking about, right? And then if you really get into it, right, if you really want to make it nice, you can get your nice, ceramic sort of material, and you can get into even teapots. I don't know if you've ever had a teapot. So a teapot is something that you put next to your brewing setup, just to kind of have there as a kind of cute little companion, essentially. Because essentially, sometimes if you brewing tea, you want to flush the first brewing. So just very quickly, just let the water through and then pour it back out so that the tea leaves open up, especially if they're rolled up like your oolongs are. And then, if you have a tea pit, you can offer the water, the flush water to the tea pit. And some of them can change kind of the coloration as they get tempered, with the different types of tea. So it's essentially like a ceramic kind of little artistic creation. And some of them are really, really quite beautiful. Like you can get either like little fishes or little cats or, anything at all. Like there's loads of them essentially. So you can start creating a collection of that as well if you want. I don't have many. I should probably get into it. But I've got a few. It's just, for me, it's a way of, I don't go for a very kind of traditional setup. That's not what it's there for me. Obviously, it's not my tradition. So I'm not following any kind of philosophical ethos, which there is many, obviously, depending on which country you look at. It is fascinating how many kind of cultural deep traditions there are with it as well. But for me, it's just about creating a cozy atmosphere. Again, probably kind of recreating that kind of feeling of going to that cave and kind of, having those long conversations essentially. And also it's just, whatever you're doing, if you're working out on being in covers, it's just nice to sometimes be able to hold a warm kind of ceramic, container. It's just something very, very grounding about that as well. So so it's just, I just follow whatever I find interesting and I find quite cohesive there.
You mentioned the word cozy, and I'd love to talk more about that because I'm really curious to know, for you personally, are you using the tea throughout the day to augment your emotional state, or is the tea the one that's affecting you?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I mean, it's one of those things that it's hard to know for sure. I wouldn't use it reactively necessarily, if that's what you're talking about there. Maybe that like, oh, I'm feeling a bit anxious, so I'll have a bit of tea to calm down. Not necessarily. Yeah, if anything, I think I would rather use it proactively, as in I would rather not feel anxious. So I'm going to, drink tea so that, I'm nice and leveled throughout the day. There's something that there's actually a word for that in the community, which is called tea drunk, which is that kind of feeling of sometimes even elation if you drink enough of it. Like it's a very kind of floaty kind of, very relaxed state. And for me as well, depending on the tea, it also leads to a slightly heightened focus that's not as jittery and kind of more flowy than coffee used to be, And especially with my oolongs, there is a type of oolong that I found works quite well for that, which is like, they're called the rock oolongs because they usually come from the Wuji mountain region of China. So, there's lots of kind of minerality in them from the rocky soil. And they're just very kind of earthy. When you drink them, you can just feel that kind of slightly roasted, oolongs in general are very kind of roasted tasting usually, and they're less oxygenated than black tea. There's still quite a bit of that there as well. So it's pretty hard to explain unless you had it, but it's a very particular taste. And I just found that it would usually just make me feel very floaty when I would have it and give me that kind of nice focus. When with your sort of direct opposite, your Japanese green teas, for example, your senchas, which are very vegetal, very almost like sometimes some of them taste like you're smelling cat grass, and tasting like sometimes like kind of courgette flavors and things like that. That's got a very different feeling as well. I mean, it's still very relaxing, but it just creates a slightly different mood, It's slightly kind of, they're a bit more lively in some way, but still very relaxing, The one thing I learned as well, because I was quite curious, how come, even though they do say that tea still has got quite high concentrations of caffeine, It's not that kind of jittery, feeling that you get from it. And what I found out is because it's also got high concentration of something called L-theanine, which is like an amino acid that's especially in green tea. It's in high concentrations. And it's something that, has those very relaxing properties. And apparently you can get it as capsules. So if you are having coffee, but you don't like the side effects of it, you could take L-theanine on the side, and that's meant to mellow it down a bit, which is very interesting. So technically you can do that if you're still a coffee drinker, but don't like the roller coaster of it.
Do you have a daily schedule of tea drinking?
I wish I had. It's the one thing that actually I'm still not great at. In general, routines is something that I would love to have more of, but my brain just kind of doesn't do them very well. I'm much more sort of in the moment, kind of depending on the day, how things progress. So at best, if I do sit down to work and then I've got a call coming up, then I will definitely then put a tea on, before calls. That's usually the easiest way. Or if I want to sit down to start writing, for example, then I'd probably have an oolong kind of thing for that kind of specific. And it's quite interesting. So I wonder if now there's also that kind of, depending on the choice of the drink, you get a different mood for a different task as well, right? There's that kind of preparation for like getting into that kind of space of different type of activity or productivity and whatever else that prompts you for that. But I still have your kind of teabaggy tea in the evening usually, because that's a kind of semi-ritual me and my partner developed, that we would, get just like a normal cup of tea, inverted commas cup of tea. And then lately we've been watching X-Files, so that became tea and Italy as well. So then sometimes they kind of less fast, kind of just put it back in the cup and drink it with some milk. That's nice. Although I have started getting just like those kind of pre-made chai tea bags as well, just like 2 extra as well. So that's become a thing as well. So I do mix it up a lot actually, and there is a bit of kind of method to the madness, but there are days where especially if I'm actually, it's just an interesting thought now, that I think about it, the days where I'm not working, I would probably have tea less, because I just don't think to put it on in that way, because that became a thing. Unless I'm sitting down to read a book, then I would again brew it and kind of have it on the side and have that kind of thing of, reading a few pages and then brewing another. But, I would usually have a thermos as well. I suppose that's a big context, because if you're planning to brew it a few times, it would just be very annoying to have to get up, go to the kettle and then, and then pour it over. So instead I have this kind of mobile solution. It's quite common as well when you see people kind of brewing the Chinese style, that's the kind of more mobile way you do it.
So you do have your pairings of types of tea to specific activities.
I think so. I would say so, yeah. In an odd sort of way. And it's not something that was necessarily fully conscious, but it just sort of emerged as, something that made sense. I suppose I'd also like to add, because we were asking, how did I start getting properly into tea as well. And on that note, when I was researching tea in Scotland, as you do, it's one of those things. I think I just found an article, I wasn't searching for it, but just something that popped up at the time. I found out that actually there is a few tea growers in Scotland. They're very small, almost like garden plantations. Because obviously Scottish climate is not perfect for tea making, let's just say. So I just found it very curious, how come that became a thing. And it's something that they researched for about 5 years to find out if it would be even possible, and then found a variety, I think from Nepal or something, that they brought in, and then a few growers started experimenting with it. And there is actually like a micro tea factory up in Cymru Croft area, which is sort of just at the beginning of the Highlands. And there's a lady there that's just started her own tea factory. She used to run plantations in Myanmar, and I think she consults as well for an American tea growers. I don't actually remember where that was exactly, but somewhere in the southwest, I think. And she settled in Scotland, opened that place up, and she's doing courses there essentially for, tea classes. And I went there to take part in that course. It's like a tea sommelier, sort of level 1. I think there's like 3 levels, that if you're actually going to work in the business, you would kind of raise up those ranks in a way, if you're a producer or a stockist or whatever else, for you to understand the history of tea and the different kind of processing ways. And it was great. It was like a 2-day course of loads of tastings, loads of learning and conversation as well. And she showed us her machines, because she does actually have machines that she works by hand to process tea from those few growers in Scotland, essentially. So she's the only person that does it. And then you can actually get a few batches now. They're very expensive, because obviously it's like ultra craft, But it's a bit of a interesting trivia, I suppose, that native tea industry exists in a tiny way.
With so many types and varieties of tea, if there's someone listening to this who wants to get a bit more into tea beyond the tea bag in the cup, how would you recommend they go about that? Where would they start?
Yeah, I think the easiest way, really, right now, there's usually a small taster packs or subscriptions you can get from different, tea selling websites, and I'm sure there's loads in America as well. I would say that's the easiest way. Kind of try to find something that either is like a taster pack, so that you can try, your different whites or your different greens or your different oolongs, and see which ones you gravitate towards. And then once you know that, okay, I'm definitely a kind of oolong or green tea drinker, for example, which is the case for me. I do like other ones, but those two are usually, the ones that I know I'll enjoy for different reasons. I think it's that kind of umami that it's got, and less bitterness. They tend to be sweeter as well, the green teas. And then just start there. Or if you want to get your subscription, so then maybe commit to it a bit more. That's also an easy way to explore the different varieties that were curated. I suppose the most important thing I would mention, once you get to that point that you would like to try it out, is to get even just the cheapest temperature controlled kettle you can get, because that's the rookie thing that I think makes many people dislike green tea, for example, again, in inverted commas. It's such a common thing that people, tell me that, oh no, green tea is so bitter, I can't drink it. And the reason for that is that usually, if you go to a cafe, and it's my biggest pet peeve, that's one of those things that sometimes I even stop asking now, because in cafes, people would have super expensive coffee machines, spending like thousands upon thousands on this big coffee machine. And then for tea, they would just use the hot water spout from that coffee machine. So it's always 100 degrees Celsius, right? It's always boiling, not even boiling, but scalding, actually, When green tea brewed at 100 degrees is undrinkable to me. It does become bitter. Like it just loses all of its notes, all of its sort of actual kind of nice sweetness that it's got. Your Japanese green tea you would drink at 70, Chinese at 80, sort of thing, and then you actually see what it tastes like. So my biggest pet peeve is, sometimes cafes would buy quite expensive actually tea leaves, like advertise it beautifully, and then like completely kill the taste the moment they brew it. Even sometimes they would have this kind of nice timers, the ability to brew it for a specific amount, but like use 100 degrees, it's already, the first second it gets destroyed. So sadly I became this person for a bit that started asking, how do you brew your green tea? And so I stopped now because no one ever does it with a temperature controlled kettle, which is bizarre because they're so cheap. Like it's not like a complex technology. It literally just allows you to like click a temperature and that's how it brews. That's all there is to it. But it's interesting. Even you go to like sushi places, you'd think that they would know how to prepare sencha, for example, and then it comes back like, again, boiling. So yeah, that's probably how I've become maybe a bit obnoxious when I stopped doing that now, because I just sort of realized that I can have my nice tea at home. If I'm out, I'd probably just get like a herbal or black tea with milk and just call it a day, because black tea can be brewed at 100. That's fine.
Dominika, where can people find you?
I think professionally, LinkedIn is probably the easiest way, right? My name and surname is quite easy to find, and there isn't that many with that combination. That's quite a unique name. On Blue Sky as well, I tend to post a bit more of a sort of variety of things, from tea to felting to, some neurodiversity chat as well. And there, I think my handle is Dominika Nowa, so like NOWO, or Dominika Now, I think. So yeah, NOW. We can probably put the link later on. So those were the kind of the two domains where I tend to communicate with people in different ways, actually, because, Blue Sky and LinkedIn
are thankfully different enough, at least for now.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks. It was great speaking to you.
This is all for this episode of Design Downtime. Thank you for joining me. And until next time, I hope you enjoy your downtime.